What's a long armer's worst nightmare? Borders. Stay tuned. Hi y'all, this is Melissa from Fork Mountain Quilting, and today we're going to learn how to properly add borders to our quilt. So let's start off with why is that important? Why is it a long armer's worst nightmare? If you just add your borders on by just taking fabric and sewing them end to end and sewing them to your quilt, what winds up happening is you wind up stretching your border fabric or stretching your quilt itself. And that causes a really wavy border. And for long armer, that is a nightmare. We do all we can do to try to lay that down flat for you so that it turns out and looks really great. So what are the steps to add a border, the proper way to add a border? So let's get started. So the first step for adding borders is you need to take several measurements. Usually it's recommended that you add the borders on your side of your quilt first and then the top and the bottom. I've already done that to this quilt. I've already put the borders on the side. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add my borders to my top and the bottom. So I need to take some measurements. It's great if you can take about 3 measurements. I like to take them at the top of the quilt, the bottom of the quilt, and then again in the middle. And then we're going to average that out. So let me show you what that looks like. So I've got my quilt draped over here so that I can get it nice and stretched out. So what I want to do is I want to get towards the bottom of my quilt and I want to take a measurement. Okay, I'm reading 102.5. All right, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to bring my quilt down towards the middle of my quilt and see what that measurement is. All right, I've done all 3 measurements. I did the bottom of my quilt, the middle of my quilt, and the top of my quilt, and I got 102.5. If those measurements would have been different, what you need to do is add them up and take the average of them so that you'll know about where you need to be. All right, so our next step is we're going to go and we're going to cut our border to equal exactly the 102.5. Not 103, not 105, not 100. We want to go 102.5. So let's go do that. All right, so now what I need to do is I need to cut my border down to the proper size. I often get asked, is it better when you piece your border just a regular straight stitch, or do you do it out on diagonal? It really is and truly up to you. I do find as a long armer that sometimes the quilts that have the borders on the diagonal, where you piece them together on a diagonal, can be a little bit on the wonky side, but it doesn't matter. Just whatever you like to see is perfectly fine. So let's cut this border down to 102.5. All right, the number one no-no on putting a border on is just taking your border, starting at one end and sewing it to the other. You need to pin your border. So I've already got my 102.5. I know exactly how long my border is. So what I want to do first is I want to find the center of my border. And what I usually do is just finger press it so that I have my center here. Big pieces. All right, I'm just going to kind of press it here and find my center. So I know that this is my center. Sometimes people like to put pins or clips in there so that you know exactly where your center is at. I also need to find the center of my quilt. You do the same thing, fold it in half and find the center. I know that this right here is my center. So what I want to do is I want to pin the center to center first. So we're going to line it up just like that. I see my center mark here. I've got my center mark on my border. So I'm going to pin it on here. The next step is you're going to go to the end of the quilt and I'm going to pin it to the end. All right, and then what I do is, you might find that one or the other might be just a little bit bulkier, but if you measure correctly, it shouldn't be off too much. So what I kind of do is I like to pull it out nice and flat, and I'm going to pin it in a couple of different spots. I usually like to break this up again into the center. So I'm going to make sure it looks like it's laying nice and flat. Pin it in the center here. And then just a couple more pins to hold it in place. You can use your binding clips as well if you want to hold this. All right, so I got this side done. So now I'm going to do on the other side of the center. And then we're going to sew this side of the border on. I've sewed my border on, and then I went back and I pressed it really nice. I like to add a little bit of starch to it so that it helps take out any fullness that it could possibly have. And it's ready to go, nice and flat. You're going to make your long armor very, very happy with this. Remember, I'm Melissa here at Fort Mountain Quilting in Rocky Mount, Virginia. Do what makes your heart happy. So long for now, and we'll see you soon.